The Legend of Zelda series is well known for its gimmicks, and each game has its own thing. That might be an item, a boat, a companion, or in Twilight Princess case, transforming into a wolf. Link's wolf transformation is a key component to progressing through the game. It would seem that there would be no way to complete the game without Wolf Link, right? Well, if you know anything about speedrunners, you know that they love to find new ways to break their games. So, a new category formed, called Minimum Transformations. The goal for this category is to beat the game with as few transformations to Wolf Link as possible. And after 5 years of speedrunners researching this category, they have gotten really close to completely eliminating this feature. So today, I'll be breaking down the history of Twilight Princess' craziest speedrun category. This is Minimum Transformations. But before we get into the history, just a quick word from today's sponsor. Now, sleep is very important for you, but I ran into one issue after I moved. My blinds, they suck. All the light comes in and I can't sleep. Until I discovered Manta Sleep, who hands down make the best sleep masks I have ever used. And trust me when I say the Manta Sleep truly has a sleeping mask for everyone. Now, of course, they have the more traditional sleeping mask that gives you that true 100% blackout, but they have so many more. For example, their weighted mask, which gives you this instant relaxation and calming effect. To their top of the lounge sound mask that gives you incredible customizations with the cups while also providing built-in headphones on the side that lets you listen to music or sounds while falling asleep. Now, the one that I've personally been using for actually a couple of months now has been the Sleep Mask Pro, because I'm a side sleeper, and usually I feel like they kind of press up on your eyes or kind of just fall off in the middle of the night, but this one doesn't, thanks to their incredible cups. Now, if you want to power up your sleep and be ready for the next gaming session or a long speedrun like in my case, then definitely be sure to click the link in the description of this video to go to Manta Sleep, and if you use promo code LINKIS7, you will get 10% off your first order. So what are you waiting for? Click the link in the description of this video. Thank you so much, Manta Sleep, for sponsoring this video. Our story begins in 2019. The Twilight Princess community was celebrating a brand new world record, and people wanted an interesting challenge. And that ended up being, can you beat Twilight Princess without Wolf Link? The community started by taking a look at how many transformations the current world record had. At the time, any percent had 66 transformations, with large groups of them being easily eliminated. Since the community wanted to know what the minimum transformations were, they didn't have to worry about the speed aspect, so any transformations that were done simply to save time were completely removed. This left the community with 30 required transformations, which would be a good starting point for the category. But getting rid of any more transformation at this point required some more out-of-the-box thinking, both in terms of glitches and routing. And one of the first areas people started investigating was after getting the Master Sword, where you're seemingly stuck in a sacred grove with no way of escaping the forest, other than the intended warp. However, this is where the community started to figure out some clever mechanics around these. In this situation, if you backtrack to the room where you fought Skull Kid, perform a save warp and then a death warp, it will actually put you to the spawn at South Farron Woods, which skips the warp. Now, this obviously takes way more time than simply warping out, but since our goal is to limit how many transformations we have, these sort of clever routes has to be implemented. Because what you might not have thought about when playing Twilight Princess is just how often the game puts you in a wolf state. Wanna warp somewhere? Transform to wolf. Wanna enter a Twilight area? Transform to wolf. Wanna get soul from an enemy? Transform to wolf. The list just goes on and on. Most of the game's intended mechanics default you to Wolf Link, whether you like it or not. So if you want to skip the transformations, you have to find ways around even the most basic of things. Now, removing warps might sound like fairly easy of a task, but what about more difficult things, such as entering a Twilight area? That sounds like an impossible task to remove, right? Well, that's what the community thought at first, until it started looking at other categories, specifically the Wii version, which actually uses a glitch known as an Epona Seamwalk, which could be cleverly implemented into this category. You see, by riding Epona into a very specific cornered Hyrule field with a perfect angle and speed value, the player is able to clip Epona out of bounds. Now this actually lets the player ride underneath the map and completely go all the way to Elden Twilight without transforming into Wolf, which then lets you kill the Shadow Beasts and entirely skip the transformations. But what about other things, such as scents or souls from Wolf Link? How could those be skipped? Well, some of these could actually be removed by using Twilight Princess' most famous useless glitch. You see, in Arborist Ground, there are 4 required transformations to kill each one of the posts, which is required to progress through the dungeon. But by doing a glitch known as a pickup slide, you can skip all 4 of these. So how is a pickup slide done? Well, it abuses an error in Link's animation to move during text boxes. When Link picks up an item, his idle animation that's happening in the background is actually missing a frame at the very end. And since his animation loops indefinitely, the missing frame will actually cause Link's position to reset to the wrong spot at the end of each loop, shifting him ever so slightly backwards. Now, this glitch is used in the low percent category. However, there is a reason that only these 2 categories use this glitch. And that's because the player has to wait a really long time for the eclipse to take place. Is because his actual speed is 0.00009 units per second. And at that pace, it takes nearly 10 hours of staring at a rupee to be able to clip through a gate. But there is also another good reason that no one thought about this glitch for this category until just now. Because unlike low percent, where you only have to do this glitch once, minimum transformation would have to do this clip twice. Once for skipping the pose, and once later in the run to reach the Palace of Twilight. This means that 20 hours of the run is spent just staring at this rupee. That's it, 20 hours. Now, thankfully, the community did find many other smaller skips that weren't as demanding as this one, such as using Rare Chew Jelly to 2-cycle Dark Beast Cannon, using back in time glitches to skip more warps, or combining more quests into single trips, and more things like that. And once all of the new optimization has been said and done, and using multiple of the glitches I just mentioned, they were able to get the transformations down to 16. But at this point, the community hit a wall. All the known glitches and routes had been tested at this point, and it stayed at 16 transformations for a long time. So what were the 16 transformations? Well, let's dive into it. You have Sewers, Master Sword, Elden and Lanayru Twilight, Midna's Desperate Hour, Snow Peak, 4 in Elden Arborist Ground, 2 to Warp to Cannon, and 4 in Palace of Twilight. This list might sound long, but one thing to remember about transformations is that they always work in numbers of 2. Since each time the game puts you in wolf form, you have to transfer back to Link. And the route was really pushing hard to complete as much as possible in each transformation. Now, for nearly 3 years, this would be the limit of load transfers. And if you've seen my video on why speedrunners can't break Twilight Princess, you might have a good idea why. Many of the issues addressed in that video also apply here. This game just has many layers of requirement in order to progress, and that makes any form of sequence breaking extremely difficult. But finally, after 3 years, something new was finally found. But funnily enough, it wasn't even a discovery for low transforms, but rather the any percent category. What the community discovered was that during the boss fight in Arborist Ground, the door you get access to after the boss is defeated is always active. So, if you could somehow clip out of bounds, you could simply step into the loading zone and skip the boss fight. And that is exactly what people figured out in 2020. By pulling up one of the skeletons from the boss arena and placing it next to this door, you could claw shot the skeleton, interrupt the animation from a bomb explosion, which lands you out of bounds. And from here, you can simply just roll into the loading zone and skip the boss fight. But wait, you might be asking yourself, how is this any useful? I mean, any percent, sure, it saves time, but this boss fight we're skipping didn't even have any transfers to begin with. And you would be right. However, the side effect of doing this skip is what's useful to us. Because you see, by returning into the boss arena at a later state, the fight will still be active. And this is where the key lays, because this allows us to perform a glitch I briefly mentioned earlier called Back in Time. Now, Back in Time is a very complicated glitch, but to simplify, we are going to be voiding out in the sand and then resetting your game at the same time. Now, this will spawn us back into the title screen thanks to the reset, but the void out will have interrupted the cutscene from playing. What this means in practice is that we now have control over Link while the title screen is up. Might not seem very useful, but what you can do from here is to load your save file, but you will stay where Link is currently located, which thanks to the title screen is at Hyrule Field, away from the desert, basically wrong warping us. And this now removed 2 transformations, putting us down to 14. Now this brought a lot of motivation back to the community, and the full focus of a few community members were on this one category now. And they set their sights on some of the heaviest transform areas left in the game, more specifically, Palace of Twilight. So why was Palace of Twilight such an issue? It's all because of this fog. The fog automatically transfers Link into Wolf. And not only that, but every time you open up one of these chests that includes the mandatory small keys, it also transfers you back into human. Now there was a lot of ideas thrown around to skip this fog, but none really solved the underlying issue, which is that even if you could get past the fog, these rooms have enemies that are required to be defeated to spawn the key chests. And these enemies only spawn inside of the fog. And not only that, but the enemies could only be dealt damage to by either the Master Sword or Wolf Link. So the only way around this was to either possibly disable the fog or at least delay the fog just long enough to where we could defeat the enemies. And after hours and hours of testing, Anorakis finally discovered a solution. And it was laughably easy. By calling Midna and then closing the prompt, running for a second, calling her and repeating that over and over again, it would allow for just a second of moon in the fog before the transformation would take place. But this could actually be repeated an infinite amount of times. So by constantly calling Midna, walking, calling Midna, hitting the sand heads, calling Midna, and repeating that, you could finally have all of the enemies defeated without transforming to Wolf. And this dropped the required transformations down drastically, all the way down to 10. Almost single digits. But they were not done yet. Next up was the Death Sword mini-boss. The issue with this fight was that one phase required the use of Wolf Link. So the only way to cut out any more transformations here was to completely skip the boss fight. Now, there actually was a known way to skip this fight, and it's even used in the any % speedrun. But unfortunately, that method used a trick known as a super jump to get up on top of this wall, which is only possible as Wolf Link. So the community had to find a brand new way to skip this fight, while only staying as Link. Now already at this point, the community tried all kinds of ridiculous setups to get over this wall, but nothing seemed to work. But once again, the solution that was found was actually to stop overanalyzing everything, and going back to sort of intended mechanics? Yeah, what the community found out, that was by getting the jump strike hidden ability, your long jumps actually gets an additional boost. So, by standing at the perfect spot and then performing a long jump attack, you could just barely reach the top of the platform, clip on top of it, and skip the boss fight. But even once that was said and done, the community wasn't done with this skip yet, because they still had the most important part left, which was naming the trick. So, the community started to brainstorm ideas, and they came up with a very simple name of Jump Strike Long Jump Attack Death Sword Skip, or JSLAJADSS by short. Yeah. Anyways, now with only 8 transformations left, it felt like it would finally be the end. Sewers to Master Sword, Tiers 1 and 2, Midna's Desperate Hour in Snow Peak Cave, and then 2 warps for City in the Sky. All of these transformations are required actions towards beating the game. So if we were to skip any more transformations, we need to somehow move the tasks from late game sections into earlier sections of the route. However, that was much easier said than done, The only transformation left that did not technically have a required timeline was warping the cannon. However, in order to move the cannon earlier into the route, you had to find a way to actually warp the cannon during an early wolf section. And the only way this was theoretically possible was by using one of Twilight Princess's oldest and most obscure discoveries, which was known as a white midnight glitch. You see, by defeating Lakebed Temple before the Linear Twilight had actually been cleared, it triggers a strange event in the game where both Midna's Desperate Hour and the Twilight State is combined. And the main benefit of this is that you can warp even during Midna's Desperate Hour, which normally wouldn't be possible. And since you're far enough into the game's story, theoretically with a bunch of rerouting, you could warp the cannon with the white midnight glitch. However, it's never that simple with Twilight Princess. In order to beat Lakebed Temple, you'll need a bomb bag. However, the only bomb bag that we have access to before beating the Twilights is the one in Kakariko Village. But in order to buy the bomb bag, we would first have to beat the Goron mines during one of the human sections before this. This causes even more issues, thanks to obtaining the Master Sword early, because an invisible wall is placed by the Goron entrance. Now, there was ways around this invisible wall by applying even more glitches, but this now adds more glitches, an even more complex route, and an entire additional dungeon mapped into the route that wasn't previously there. But even if you were to do all of that, it would only solve half of the issue, because even by solving the issue of the bomb bag, you still wouldn't have a way into the dungeon itself. And the answer to this issue of entering the dungeon kept the community in check for a long time. But it was finally solved, but not actually thanks to a new discovery, but rather thanks to a rediscovery? Yeah, it sounds really weird, but basically, there was a known glitch known as an Akko dive, which was actually found all the way back in 2018, and it would solve the issue of entering this dungeon early, with the current requirements. The only issue? The video had been deleted, and no one remembered how to do it. Thankfully, there was a reference in Zelda speedruns about this glitch, and some old runners had seen this glitch and had memories of it. So when the idea was brought up, people were attempting to rediscover the glitch because it could possibly solve the issue. And so Anoricus got to testing, and after many hours of trying, he actually got it. He clipped underneath Lake Hylia and swam straight into the loading zone for Lakebed Temple. This would mean that the cannon could officially be warped after the third dungeon during Midna's Desperate Hours, which would mean that we could then combine everything together, meaning that the total transformations were now down to just 6. And that is where this incredibly complicated history stands today. The current world record with only 6 transformations is 24 hours and 29 minutes by Anoricus. Now, could this go any lower? Only time will tell. There has been theories and ideas of possible sequence breaks in Twilight Princess, but as far as today goes, that's where the record stands. Now, if you want to watch another Twilight Princess video I made about why Twilight Princess is so hard to break in terms of speedrunning, you can click on the screen right now. It's a really great watch and I really recommend it. I also want to thank Anoricus so much for inspiring me to make this video, because it wouldn't have been possible without him and the amazing community behind Twilight Princess. But that's it. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you all in the next one. Later everybody, bye bye.